start.
The sound isn't very loud
Started.
if you watch the video on WhatsApp.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. Today is lesson 2 of our online learning Divinity featuring paper 1, the Old Testament prophets. Now, last lesson we learned about the prophets, or at least the rough idea about what pre-canonical prophets are, which is Moses, Samuel and Elijah. And we also learned about, or at least we learned that there's a whole bunch of prophets in this thing called the pre-exilic period, which are Hosea, Amos, and then maybe Isaiah and Jeremiah. So today we're going to be looking a little bit more detail. We're going to zoom in a bit more into the history of these two periods, okay, and talk about different things. But first we have to talk about this, okay. Today's lesson is also a very important lesson about the name of God. Okay? The name of God is 4 letters, YHWH, right? And what this means, okay, pronounce this, but nobody pronounces it. Those who know Jewish or Hebrew don't pronounce it, because it's so holy that no good Jew will pronounce it, okay? We in English, we add the vowels, so we pronounce it like this, right? But we don't care, right? We don't treat the name of God in the same respect and reverence as the Jews do. But these 4 letters are very important for understanding, because it is the very foundation of what we understand God to be in the Old Testament. And later on we'll see how the prophets seek to bring the people back to the worship of YHWH, right? Even in my classes, I don't even pronounce his full name, right? I just say the YHWH, okay? They have a name for it. It's called the Tetragrammaton. Okay? The Jews call it Hashem. And when they encounter these 4 letters in the text, they pronounce it as Adonai, okay? Which is Lord, which means Lord. And in our texts, in our English text, it is written as L-O-R-D with all capital, as opposed to L-O-R-D, big cap and small caps, right? This is all caps, 4 caps, right? So, now this name of God, the name of God, is introduced in full form in Exodus chapter 3 verse 14. Okay? This is when Moses asked God, what is your name? But if you look at your Old Testament carefully, you will notice in Genesis chapter 2 already, and this is like one whole book before Exodus 3, right? There is already YHWH. Okay? There's already a word. Now, if you are fairly scientific or fairly rational, you will immediately sense some kind of discrepancy there, because you say, wait a minute, how can God be called that when he has not even introduced himself, right? Only in Exodus chapter 3. Moses says, what is your name? God says, I am, this, okay? And in English, it's translated as I am, okay? But there's so much more to it than that, and we have talked a little bit. I think I might have to dedicate a whole lesson for this, but I just want to introduce this a little bit and then talk about the history. Now, so anyway, in chapter 2, right, in Genesis, we see the L-O-R-D word used, right? Now, one way to answer that query you may have is to say that if the assumption that Moses wrote the 5 books of the law, hence Genesis, is true, then it's normal for Moses to have used L-O-R-D, because by then he had already acquainted himself with L-O-R-D. Okay, so that's fine. That's one way to answer it. But there are many other ways to answer it, and later on we will study about that much later. And it's very, very complicated. Okay, this thing called the documentary hypothesis, right, or known as JEP. Okay, it's a heading, but we won't go in that today. Right now, anyway. So this YHWH is a very distinct name compared to the generic name of God, which is El. El Shaddai, El Gibor, El Elyon, right? Or Daniel, right? All these names of the Hebrews all have the name of God inside of them, right? okay, and so on. Okay, so El is a generic name for God. Okay, God. And usually, if you have the word, you know, Lord God, okay, it will be written as God with all caps, but don't worry about that for now. Anyway, just for your understanding, Abraham, while he was worshipping God, he did not know the name of God. Okay, so he called God as El Elyon, God Most High. Okay, the highest God up there. Okay, so that is, he called God El Elyon, right? So, but as we study and as we look at it today in our brief, another kind of slightly more detailed look at the history, we will see that the worship of YHWH is very, very central to our study of the prophets. Okay. Now, why do we say this? Now, we have done an overview. We have seen how God calls Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. Right, Genesis 1 to 11. There is a whole bunch of stories, right? You've got the Noah, the big flood. You've got the Tower of Babel. You've got you know, all kinds of stuff going on, and Cain and Abel, and even the garden story in the garden. Now, some scholars, especially liberals, they think that Genesis 1 to 11 are what is known as etiological stories. What is etiological? It is origin stories, but not historically accurate, or not even historical at all. They are myth-based stories, meaning that, oh, the origin of Malaysia is actually Parameswara and then the mouse deer, but nobody really knows whether the story is really true or not. Okay, or maybe the whole thing about these hang tuas and all that, you know, how they came about. But later on, it was proved that they're actually Chinese, right? So then there's a bit of, then they removed that from the history textbooks. But these Genesis 1 to 11, the liberal scholars say that, like, the story of Noah and the flood is impossible. The story of giants walking on the earth, the Nephilim, is impossible. You know, story of Tower of Babel is also impossible. How can God give them all sudden language all over a sudden, right? Things like that. So the liberals, they deny these events. Okay. However, I disagree. I mean, I think that we have precedents, even, or at least we have incidences and evidence in our current world about that go back to the original stories, right? Even historically. I mean, for example, languages, like how did languages form? Okay, how and why did languages form? Dialects, and you know, the basic thing which anthropologists are still trying to crack their heads to figure out what is it all about. Okay, so I think there's some thing going on. But anyway, whatever it is, a lot of things start to come into a bit more focus in Genesis chapter 12, where God calls this man from this area over here, which is Ur, of the Chaldeans, of the Babylonians, and he leaves his family, his father's family, and brings along his nephew. His brother died, so he brings on his brother's son Lot and his family, and God calls Abraham away from the populated cities. Okay, that's sometime in around 2000 BC. Right? About that. About 2000 BC, we begin the story. Now, we know from our archaeological records that civilization, or the civilization that we know, roughly began around 10,000 BC, right? Where people began to use languages a little bit more, okay? They began to build cities, they established agricultural kind of lifestyles and things like that. Now, if you want to get into a apologetical question that says, you know, did Adam really exist? Was he an actual physical person, or was it another etiological story? Well, there's a whole debate about that. Some Christians believe that he was real, some Christians believe he's not real. I happen to believe that he was real. I mean, to me, because of my belief in Romans, right? Okay, anyway, so the story of the patriarchs in Genesis begins in 2000 BC, right? When Abraham is called by God to leave his comfort of the city, comfort of all the access, the accessibility to all his resources and things like that, and to move out eventually into an unknown area which God tells him is going to be his land, right? This whole, what is known as the Fertile Crescent, right? there's this whole fertile area, supposedly fertile, but actually certain parts are not fertile at all. Certain parts like the hill country here is actually very dry, right? I've been to Israel; it's very dry, meaning you can just walk out in the evening time and you know that it won't rain, right? It's just dry. You know, you can sleep on the grass. You know, it's very brown and things like that. But it's not dry to the point where it's like Malaysia, like we're having like this dry spell and all that. You know, any flame will cause that kind of thing. But over there, it's hot, but it's not humid. Don't know how it makes sense, but anyway. So to them, rain is very important, right? Rain for the crops is very important. And there's no rain, you know, they just lose everything. Okay. But the patriarch Abraham started off not as a farmer, although farming and agriculture was developed by them. He started off as owner of livestock. Okay, he had some basic livestock, not a lot, and somehow he felt that El Elyon, okay, God Most High, called him from his father's house to journey to a new land which God would promise him, right? Which he did, eventually did, and he camped out at what is known as the Oaks of Mamre. Right, all this is in Genesis. And he camped out there, and that was his kind of like his base. It's kind of right in the middle of this whole land. He's a sojourner, nobody knows him, there were cities all around, primitive maybe in some ways, not very advanced, not very huge, fortified like the Assyrians or the Babylonians, but decent cities, okay, like with decent fortifications. You can't just go in with your sticks and your clubs to kind of take the city. You need a little bit more sophistication to take some of the city. By the way, he camped out there, that was his home. Of course, you know the story. There was famine, he had to go down to Egypt once, and then another famine, and he had to go to another place at once. But the key thing about Abraham was that he became the father of what today we call as a Jewish nation. Okay? All Jews trace their origins back to this guy, Father Abraham, right? So even in Jesus' time, the Pharisees would say, our father is Abraham, right? And Jesus says, your father is not Abraham. And you're all shocked, right? And say, your father is Satan. Oh, you all wanted to stone him to death. So, and Jesus went one step further. Not only did he say that your father is Satan, he said that before Abraham was, I am. Okay? And all the Jews knew what that meant. He's saying he is this, right? Double whammy, right? Jesus likes to purposely create trouble for himself. Like students taking divinity, Anyway, so Abraham comes out of this place and he camps there, and of course you know the story of how Isaac is promised to him. There's the whole complication of Ishmael and so on and so forth. Let's fast forward that. Okay, so we go into fast forward mode. We cross the Joseph and the 12. We go into Egypt. Okay, let's go into Egypt, and this is now 1400 BC. Okay. They spent about 400 years in so that means round about 1800 they go into Egypt, right? There is an alternate date for about 1200 BC. Okay. Now, so they went to Egypt around 1800 BC. They stayed there for 400 years, and now they are in trouble. Okay. The people have grown a lot through persecution and difficulty. You may wonder, like, how is that even possible? Under severe circumstances, the answer is very simple. You don't have birth control, okay? And you got suffering, right? So you get this guy coming back from work, and he's really tired, and poor thing, he's got beaten up by the slave traders and stuff like that. Not slave traders, the slave masters, and the wife is like, oh, you poor thing. Oh, then this guy is like, I'm so sad, Then the wife's like, okay, comfort you, sayang, you'll be like, then ding, got baby, right? So you keep producing babies, under adverse circumstances. Another similar situation was observed in Pakistan, right? Where there was rolling blackouts, right? In Pakistan some years ago, no electricity. Everybody's like in a state of difficulty, not enough electricity to do basic work. But then they realized that the population grew. Okay, so I'm not going to comment more on that, but even in the modern setting, sometimes you get this kind of thing. Anyway, so you have a huge population growing right now in the country itself, kind of like our migrants, right? The Myanmaris and all that. They're just producing babies like nobody's business. And so, but over time, over 400 years, the migrant community in Malaysia has now grown to have almost a state on its own, right? Maybe they take over brick fields, right? So this whole area is like Myanmar area, right? And so that's the kind of thing that's happening in Egypt, and the rulers are a bit uncomfortable about it, and they start saying, okay, what we're going to do with these guys. We're going to persecute them more and let them build our cities, make them our slaves and things like that. And people are crying out for help. God sends Moshe, right, to draw out, right, and he, of course, his background. Won't go into the detail of that. He is called by God after 40 years in the wilderness to go back to his people. Now he's 80 years old now. He brings the people out. Now, okay, let's just pause for a moment here, okay? Because three of the pre-canonical prophets is Moses, Samuel, and Elijah. So I have to talk about Moses, right? And some of you are like, oh wait, yay, we can learn a bit about the Torah as well. Good. So let's talk about Moses here. Now, who is Moses? Moses is actually from the tribe of Levi. Okay, his father is Amram, his mother is Jehoshabed. Right? His father is Amram. Okay, so his mother doesn't want to kill him because you're supposed to throw the babies into the water and things like that. His brother survives, Aaron survives. His sister survives, Miriam. They didn't kill the girls, but they were killing the boys. And the mother had Moses, the kind of the third guy, and is supposed to throw him into the water, right? But she didn't want to throw him in the water. She threw him into the water, but with with a kind of cradle. So she, in a sense, she did throw him into the water. Oh, I threw him into the water. So when people say, I heard that you were pregnant, all the people talking about you were pregnant. Joshua says, yeah, I threw him into the river. Sorry, yeah, I did it, But she didn't say that there was a boat. Okay? So little Moses, and then she tells Miriam, go and look after the baby, I'll see what happens, make sure that it flows to the right place, which is towards a safe place, which was the place where the Pharaoh's daughters would be bathing.
So she knew that the first daughter would.
Yes. Okay. Maybe she purposely, maybe she planned it out. These guys are not stupid, right? They're like, oh, I'm gonna die. They are enterprising, resourceful mothers, especially they love the kids, right? So she's pregnant. She's got plenty of time to think about it, right? She's got 9 months to like, oh my, what am I gonna do with this baby, right? I want the baby. It's cute. It's moving inside of me. I don't want to kill the baby, right? So she's got plenty of time to start planning about it, right? When the baby comes out, they all know that the Pharaoh's daughters are all bathed downriver or whatever in a certain place, right? So they just put the baby there, make sure they design a tub, whatever thing that is suitable, and flows down, into the hands of the Pharaoh's daughter. Maybe they put it right at the right time where, maybe once a week or once a season, the daughters come to bathe, right? So at the right time, you just put the baby in the water and let it flow, right? And it goes to the daughters, and they're like, oh, it's so cute, right? As one of the Hebrews one, I'm not sure whether he was circumcised or not, okay? Because we know that in the story of, okay, no, right? That's too long. Anyway, so he's adopted by this Pharaoh's daughter, and then he gets into the household, he grows up, and he's taught all the ways of the Egyptians. He's very good in what he does. And then eventually he kills this guy, he runs away, comes back, and he tells, while he's away in the desert, this is a side note here, is it'd be interesting to think about this, if I were Moses, and I think about this a lot, right? One of my favorite guys is Moses. But I'm thinking, if I were Moses and I'm just like camping out, right, when I'm like 56 years old in the desert, with a bunch of sheep, and I'm like the Harvard trained guy, and I know like everything about everything, and I'm like with a bunch of sheep, in some desert somewhere, right? Like what kind of life is that, right? It's a sad life, okay? So all your dreams, all your visions, all grandeur and all that kind of success and all that glory are all gone, zero, okay? You are nothing now, right? Then 40 years later, after when everything is completely dead, he encounters God. Okay? The burning bush, Exodus chapter 3, okay? He goes to the burning bush. Now the burning bush situation is very simple. The bush actually spontaneously catches fire. It's like Malaysia, right? When it gets too hot, sometimes like a reflective thing, maybe water or a stone, the sun shines in a certain way, it catches fire, and the bush is actually very dry, right? So this is a very normal phenomenon happening in the desert, right? So the bush will suddenly catch fire, and then it will burn, 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 and the whole thing will just like that, because it will run out of branches to burn. Okay, but Moses saw this burning bush when he left, and he went, to bring his sheep to find pasture. When he came back in the evening, it's still burning. Okay, so he's been in the desert for 40 years. He knows the desert so well, and he's like, this is strange. Okay, this is very strange. And he did not seek to meet God. He did not seek God. You get what I mean? He did not seek God. God sought him. Okay, so he goes to that closer to take a look. From the story we know, he goes closer to look, and then he hears a voice. Now things getting weirder, right? He hears a voice from the bush saying, Moses. Well, calls his name out of nowhere, right? He may not even be known as Moses in those parts. He may not be known as some other name, right? In that language, right? So suddenly somebody calls his real name, Moses, and it says, take off your sandals, for this is holy ground. Wow, what on earth is going on? Takes off his sandals, right? And then he goes, and then what does he say? What does the voice say? I am the God of your father Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's when Moses goes, whoa, this is the real thing. This is the God of my ancestors. I've heard him, I've heard people talk about him, right, among the Hebrew slaves, but I have never met him myself. And here is he standing in the midst of the flame. Of course, you can see him, right? But you see the flame, he's taken off his sandals, he's covering his head with his cloak, and there's voice talking to him in the language he understands. Okay? And the voice tells him, I have heard my cry, the cry of my people in Egypt, right? I want you, Moses, to go back to Egypt and bring them out. And Moses is just like, you gotta be kidding. Do you have any idea what I've gone through, Mr. God? Okay, what I've done. All I know is sheep. That's all I know now, right? All my skill and whatever, how to fight, how to kill people. Oh, I'm now shearing sheep. I don't know anything anymore, right? And God's like, you must go and then he's like, no, I can't. He gives excuse after excuse after excuse, right? He says, I can't speak, I stuttered, right? Moses, and God's like so upset. He's like, who created the mouth? It's like, who created the mouth, right? And so on. It goes on. So there's a whole experience altogether. That is what scholars call that experience that he had as a call narrative. A story of the calling of a prophet. And every prophet has a call narrative, right? Isaiah has a call narrative in the middle of the temple. Jeremiah has a call narrative when he was young. Samuel has a call narrative when he was very, very young, serving in the temple. Serving in the Mishkan. Elijah, doesn't have a call narrative. We don't know where he just appeared out of nowhere. But he was from the area of Gilead, okay, Tishbe, which is on the eastern side. Okay. Anyway, so that was Moses' call narrative. God calls him to be a leader to bring the people back. Okay. So he, after trying to turn God down so many times, God gets angry, right, at the end. And finally says, okay, I'll send Aaron with you. Just go. So Moses, right? And of course, the long story of it. There's the 10 plagues. Okay. Talks to Pharaoh. Pharaoh says no, and so on. And eventually, Pharaoh says, okay, go, get out of here, right? And Moses brings the people out, okay, of Egypt, and completely bloodlessly, right? Now, historically, there were funny, weird peoples coming into Egypt and taking over control, right? There is actually historical precedent of Cushites, of Hyracos people. There's different groups of people coming into of Egypt. Different theories also. So some people say maybe the Israelites were there's another group called the Hapiru. These are foreign groups, foreign ethnic groups coming into Egypt and just kind of destabilizing the country a little bit with their rebellion and armed rebellion. Sometimes they fight and all this kind of thing. So, but according to Genesis, the Exodus story, the people leave peacefully, okay? There's no fighting, there's no bloodshed. Bloodshed only on the Egyptian side, okay? No one died in the Israel side. Then they leave Egypt, okay, and there's one very important thing I want to highlight here, is they institute, or at least the story tells us, that the institution of a very important festival of the Jewish people. What's it called?
Passover.
The Passover. Okay, the Passover marks the beginning of the Jewish year, and we are actually coming up to a Passover. You know, Easter, our Easter is the Jews' Passover. It's the same. Yes. Every time we celebrate Good Friday and Easter, the Jews are celebrating their Passover. It's always the same every year. Okay, so the Jews are going to be celebrating their Passover like 2 weeks from now. No, next week. Next week. So anyway, and that Passover, it symbolizes the beginning of a new stage in God's plan. God is now calling a nation. In the past, He used to call Abraham as an individual, Isaac as an individual, Jacob as an individual, but with a family. Now He's calling 600,000 males and 1.4 million females, right? As a nation out of where they are. You know, you contrast that with Abraham, right? Calling out from Ur of the Chaldeans, right? To come to this land. And now God is calling out 600,000 people. The name Moshe means to draw out, to call out, right? And just a side note here, the name church, the word church, right, in Greek is called ecclesia. Guess what it means? The called out ones. Zang, zang, zang. Okay, so anyway, you know, God is calling out 600,000 people, okay? And they all mark the beginning of their call on the day of Passover. So every Passover, the Jews will celebrate and they will say, the kid was supposed to say, Daddy, Mommy, or Grandpa, why is tonight different from other nights? And the grandpa will say, oh, he'll tell the story. You see, 2,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago, you know, God called Moses to call the people out, right? And he'll tell the story. So anyway, they mark the beginning of the new year and they leave Egypt, okay? As you know the story, they deal with the Egyptians, the water opens, closes and stuff. Some scholars say it didn't happen, you know, some scholars say they just walked through the big lakes. There were lakes actually, so they thought, okay, they just walked through the lakes, right? So there's a whole debate about that, okay? But anyway, some scholars say it never happened, all these things are right. Anyway, but Moses brings the people out and they go through the desert. Some scholars say it's impossible for 2 million people to walk around in the desert with no food and drink. Okay? You know, how are you going to feed the animals and all this kind of stuff? Well, one thing is that Moses, okay, the leader of the whole group, had experience leading a bunch of sheep around in the desert. Okay? So he had rough ideas about survival, right? I'm sure he had 40 years to kind of figure out how to survive. Like how to use cactus, you know, how to, you know, conserve energy, you know, and rest at certain times and things like that. Also, they had livestock. So they could have killed certain livestock to eat, they could have taken the milk of certain livestock to eat and so on and so forth. So it's still possible. But some scholars say, you know, there was no evidence of, you know, animal bones or whatever thing, you know, all around the desert, so therefore it couldn't have happened. But one day people might somehow find out something, figure out something, and then that theory will be destroyed again, right? That has happened before. Anyway, so they go through the desert, they come to Kadesh Barnea, and they're supposed to enter in. Now this is recorded in the book of Numbers. Okay, so from Exodus we skip straight over Leviticus, because Leviticus is just all laws, right? So we skip over Leviticus, go to Numbers, and then Kadesh Barnea, they don't want to go in. They say, we're going to die, right? You know, 10 out of the 12 spies said that the land is full with giants, so we're all going to be squashed, we're going to be killed, right? So, now personally looking at our current situation in the world, we have people who are very tall, 7 feet, 8 feet tall, right? So the fact that we have giants, right, you know, huge guys walking around, it's possibly indicated that there were bigger sized people around maybe in that area for whatever genetic reasons. Anyway, there were big guys around, okay? Like Shaquille O'Neal, 7 feet tall, okay? So, you know, they were all there and then they were all armed. to fight. And all these guys go in there and all the Jews are like, we're going to die, right? So, of course, Joshua and Caleb prevail, the whole generation die off, all 40 years of wandering in the desert. And during that period of time, for those of us who are the conservative view, we believe that during the 40 years, Moses had plenty of time to write. So he can write slowly Leviticus lah. He can write slowly Genesis lah. He can write Exodus lah. Right? He can write everything lah. Right? Don't design the temple lah. You don't do all the tabernacle. They got plenty of time. 40 years to do it. Okay? So that's the conservative view. The liberal view say, oh, it was not 40 years lah. It was 2 years lah. Blah blah blah. Or some conservative scholars say there was no Egyptian. There was no Exodus at all. Whatever, okay? So if you don't believe in anything, don't believe in anything lah. I mean, what's the point of studying the Bible, right? Okay, anyway, so the second generation come, and then they stand at the foot of the promised land, and they're about to enter. Okay, now Moses gives to them, according to the Torah, he gives to them the second law in Deuteronomy. Okay, and in this law, okay, in this book of Deuteronomy, he tells people about the worship of the Lord, or YHWH, your God. Okay, your Elohim. YHWH, your Elohim. God. Okay. So this YHWH worship is established through the tabernacle, which is what is known as the cultus, or the cult for short. It's a system. It is not our traditional understanding of, oh, it's a cult, it's bad guys, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. No, in academic sense, the cultus means the whole system of worship. It is, So this cult of the worship of YHWH is established through Deuteronomy. Okay, and also because Deuteronomy, they say, okay, when you enter the land, this is what you must do. When you enter the land, you must establish a place of worship, right? When you enter the land, you must do this and do that, and so on and so forth. The whole list of laws. Okay, and actually, one rabbi actually sat down and counted all the laws: Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy, all added up together. So, guess how many laws there are?
Thousands of them.
Less than that. I know. 500 over? No.
Or 300.
No. Answer is 613 laws. Remember this number. There are a few numbers you must remember in your divinity, right? 613, 722, 586, 66 AD, 70 AD, these dates are important dates. Okay. So 613 laws, including 10 commandments. And these 613 laws established at Mount Sinai when God made this agreement with the people, okay, Moses charged the people to follow these 613 laws, which is all in the Torah, okay. But that's where the problem started. After Moses died and Joshua entered the land and started taking land, which we covered this last week, in the previous lesson, they couldn't really do it, okay? They couldn't kill off all the people that they were supposed to kill off. And therefore we see judges, right? The people just losing control. They are now settled. They're finally not traveling anymore. They're not like, camping in tents. Now they can actually live in houses. That's an upgrade, actually, right? Achievement unlocked, whatever. So, you're living in a house now. You've got a little farm. You've got a vineyard of your own, right? In the desert, you have no time to tend your vineyard, right? You only have to look after your sheep and goats and all that, right? So, but now you've got sheep and goats, yes, your old sheep and goats. But you've also got all this other stuff. It's cool. It's great, right? And you've got roads, you've got trade with other people and things like that. And then there is also cultural influence. Worship of other gods. Okay? Now the people of Israel, when they left Egypt, they were not necessarily the most holy of them either. Okay? It's a whole bunch of people. So there are the good guys, the not so good guys. The not so good guys meaning the guys who are more into Egyptian worship. Okay? But they followed God enough to survive the plague, right? The 10th plague, right? So God says, okay, you must make sure you must paint on your doorpost. So everybody, whether you're worshipping whatever, you just put paint lah, you follow lah, everybody follow lah, and then everybody say, by God lah. Okay? But in their heart, right, in their mind, their understanding of the gods is there are many gods. There's Baal, there's El, there's all these Egyptian gods out there, right? And there is YHWH, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of our ancestors. So for them, right, the Israelites, it's very normal to have many gods. Okay? For the Israelites. They were taught maybe when young, oh, Abraham only worship one God, El Elyon, right? But these guys in Egypt, there's nobody there to kind of like monitor them. There's nobody to tell them, you must only worship one God. All their neighbors are surrounded by the Egyptians, they're all worshipping the other gods, so, why not? Okay? So they worship, and we see this, right, in the book of Exodus, when Moses disappears up on the mountain for many days, and the people are like, what's wrong? What happened to Moses? Let's have a little party, right? They have an orgy. So they have a celebration, they make this golden calf, right? And the golden calf is actually from Egypt. It's an Egyptian bull god. I can't remember the name of the god. I think Osiris, right? The bull, right? So they make a calf, okay, of this god and say, this is YHWH who brought us out of Egypt. Osiris, they just ganti his name. It's like the Muslims say, Allah and Yahweh and Jesus all the same. Actually, it's not the same. Very different. Okay? Allah has no son. God, YHWH, has a son. But the Jews also say, YHWH doesn't have a son. Or at least, not in the way that you Christians say it is. Okay, anyway. But, so the people, the Israelites, alright, they now are entering into a land filled with idols. They themselves saw the power of God, okay, in the desert. They saw how this YHWH is so powerful, so amazing, right? Can create manna, can send quail from nowhere, can destroy all their enemies and things like that. Joshua says, hold the sun, right? The sun holds holes and things like that. And they are like, wow, this YHWH is great, it's cool. But when you get into the land in Canaan, they're surrounded with all kinds of people say, yeah, cool, this is one to another more. He's just the name is the same guy, he's probably El, right? El is the chief god over all the gods. Okay? And some people say, well, Abraham called him El Elyon, so it's the same thing. Right? YHWH and El are the same thing. It's like Zeus lah. Zeus, and you've got Artemis, you've got Athena, you've got Jupiter, you've got Hades, you've got what have you, right? The whole pantheon of gods. Or even in the Hindu pantheon, same thing. You've got Brahman, you've got Shiva, you've got Kali, you've got Krishna, and the list goes on. Millions. There are 300 million Hindu gods. Right? I mean, after a while, you just stop counting. You're like, oh, whatever, man. Just whatever. Right? So, but the Hindus will say, it's the same thing. It's the same God. But it's not. It's different. Okay? So, but anyway, the people couldn't know, right? In fact, if I tell you today also, you'll be not sure, right? But anyway, the people followed the gods of the surrounding nations. And Moses had warned them in Deuteronomy, do not follow the gods of the surrounding nations. But nobody listened to him. Okay? It's kind of like what we see today, right? The government telling us to do certain things, and we don't do certain things, right? You must and like don't do any subjects, okay? Just don't do, right? And things like that, right? But anyway, the people just don't follow, okay? The people don't follow, and then calamity strikes, right? Enemies come and attack them, and they get all freaked out, and the enemies oppress them, and they cry out to God, oh, YHWH, right? You've saved us in the past, please save us now, right? Then God kind of raises up a leader. So a leader comes up and says, we have been living in suffering and oppression and humiliation for far too long. He's like, yeah. Okay, be Prime Minister. And then he's like, okay, I won't be Prime Minister, I'll just be judge, right? So he'll be the judge. And he rules over these tribes, or the tribes give him a loyalty, and he's like, well, everybody attack! Everybody attack! Then they fight against, and then they're victorious, right? Samson, Gideon, all these guys. Now, Samuel is the last of the prophets. The judges. Okay? And as you know the story of Samuel, actually, this whole thing about Moses, right, I spent one whole lesson on it. Now I'm like covering all three in one lesson. That could be a good thing. Anyway. But anyway, so Samuel is this young guy who, again, is not from, he is from the tribe of Levi, but his parents stay in the hill country of Ephraim, okay? So he's known as an Ephraimite, but actually from the tribe of Levi, very confusing. Anyway, but Levites travel around, okay? So his father, Elkanah, and has a wife called Hannah, okay? He had two wives. Hannah and
Is it Pama?
no.
Metro. I don't know, it's just the P.
Yes, correct. You're right.
P
It's
or
P. The answer is Penina. Okay. So anyway, this annoying Penina is like, I got a kid, you got a kid, so you know, and of course Elkanah loves the wife more, and then Penina is kind of like a what's the word for it lah? Somebody to carry on your thing ma. So Penina knows that she's not so loved, so she purposely make you think so great, you can't even produce kids, so Hannah's like okay, so Hannah goes to God and prays and cries and all that kind of stuff, and God answers her prayer, okay. And she says, I'm going to give the first son to you, right? Out of desperation, as long as I have a kid, I just want to prove a point that I can have kids, right? And the thing is, I know we laugh about it seriously, but for a girl at that time, that's all a girl is supposed to do, right? To produce kids. And you can't even do your most basic stuff, right? It's horrible. You can't even show your face to your community, all the women. Every woman in the town can produce kids, and you're the only girl who cannot produce kids. All got husbands, and you're the only one who was like. And then one of those aunties who's now got, your age one who's got like 3 kids now, is like, so when's your name? When's the first baby? And you're like, okay, that's how Hannah felt. And anybody else like Zechariah and Elizabeth and everybody else. Even today, my cousin, okay, and his wife cannot produce kids. 40-something years old. I tell you, it's horrible. My wife is like, would 2 kids already. And we were married like later than them, and now we've already got 2 sons walking around. It's horrible. I mean, if I were them, I mean, anyway. Huh? So, I mean, I feel for them, I don't know. So, but anyway. Sorry?
I got 2 sons and you got you with me, sorry.
Yeah. Anyway, so okay.
Sorry.
So Hannah cries out to God, and God answers her prayer, and she gives the son to God. And he is a priest, okay, living in that area, okay, and he's living in this area called Shiloh, okay. Now where is Shiloh? Shiloh is also somewhere in the middle, okay. So let's actually the geography is very important, right? But I don't have a good map, right? So to show you all the precise locations of where it is. Shiloh is also somewhere in the middle in that area, and it was the place, the location of where the temple or the Mishkan, the tabernacle of Moses, was set up.
What was that thing? The round thing?
This one? This is the Dead Sea, this is the Sea of Galilee, this is Jordan River.
Oh.
Okay. So it's somewhere in the middle. Down south is Judah and Benjamin, and up north is Zebulun and Asher and all these guys. And in the middle is Ephraim and Manasseh, right? And over here is Reuben, Gad, okay? The tribes. Okay, then, so Shiloh is in between Ephraim, right? In that area. And so Samuel grows up in that kind of environment. Unfortunately, he grows up in a horrible environment because Eli, who was the high priest at the time, had 2 sons who were doing horrible things. Right? These 2 sons were sleeping with the women who came to the temple. They were probably following some of the customs of the nations around them, because there's this thing called the temple prostitute that the other nations will practice. Meaning that even in Greece, right, you go to the temple of the goddess of beauty. What's her name?
I forgot.
Yeah, or whatever. The girl in that clamshell. That Venus. Yeah. You go to the temple of Venus, right? So then the wife is like, oh, I need to give birth, right? Then the husband is like, oh, okay, I bring my wife along because cannot. So then the priestesses will all say, welcome to the temple of Venus, right? This is where all your dreams come true, right? You want to have a baby, the goddess of love and all that kind of stuff, blah blah blah, right? So then what they do is they ask the husband, right, to sleep with one of the temple prostitutes to let the power of Venus flow through him or her or whatever it is. So he sleeps with one of the temple prostitutes there, a woman obviously. And then he comes out and he's like, now you go back and try it on your wife, and it will work. Sometimes it doesn't work, okay? Because it's not the issue of the guy, it's the issue of the girl, right? So, but that is a very common practice.
Not jealous, man.
Horrible, right? But wife, I mean, what to do? She's desperate, right? So, but the thing is, even in the area in that whole Middle Eastern area, Palestine area, there were temple prostitutes. Okay, so these guys, these 2 sons of 2 sons of Eli, were doing that kind of thing. They say, you want more power for your sacrifice, you sleep with us. So So the girl, okay, you're the high priest son, what? You know what? I don't know anything, what? We are just a, kid producing person, So I'm not educated, right? These girls are not educated at all. So they go there and then just sleep with the guy, and horrible things. And all the people are not happy about it. They're like, what's this, man? And Eli doesn't do anything about it. He just called them one time. You cannot do that, what you do that? Don't. But then they still do it. Okay, so God's like, I'm going to punish Eli and his sons, right? So, true enough, that's what happened. Sons get killed in battle, Eli dies, and Samuel grows up in a kind of situation. The Ark of the Covenant is brought into captivity and nobody knows where it is. Okay, and that is the beginning of Samuel's life. Okay, but we've run out of time. So, in our next lesson, tomorrow, right, we're going to look at Samuel, and after that we're going to Elijah, then we're going to look at Hosea, then we're going to Amos, then we're going to look at Isaiah, and Jeremiah. Okay? Yeah, not in one lesson lah, okay, but we quick succession lah, okay.
We have
So
18 more weeks.
yeah, okay.
To like
August.
August, 18 to 20 more weeks to August.
And by then we'll finish 50 T-Bags, right?
Yeah. So you have to finish 2 T-Bags in a week. Okay, bye bye. Turn off first.
Okay.
It's more than 2 per week.
Now it's more than 2 per week because you